Today, Kinder Morgan announced that they would be suspending any further funding from the build-out of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Now, this is a project that is critical to Canada's economy for many reasons. This is not just an Alberta project. And it's also passed some of the world's most rigorous and robust environmental regulatory reviews. And if it is built out, and I certainly hope it is, it would be built out under one of the most rigorous environmental protection regimes on the planet. So they said that their announcement today was due to the fact that they had concerns about the, quote, current environment. So what is the current environment in Canada for the build out of natural resource projects? Quite frankly, we have a prime minister and provincial government leaders who are unable to acknowledge flat out the necessity of these projects and then do what it takes to build them out in an environmentally responsible way. It's as blunt as that. So I want to do two things this evening. I want to talk about why this project is important and some of the considerations that our feckless prime minister needs to make as he proceeds under this announcement. First of all, frankly, this decision today and the lack of leadership that we've seen by the Prime Minister, this doesn't just fail Alberta, it fails all of Confederation. I have seen so many people, and we've certainly seen the leaders of Alberta and BC engage in trade wars. We've got talk of trade wars. And so we are now at the point, because of the lack of leadership in Ottawa, where we are engaging in interprovincial trade wars and internal trade wars, which puts us completely at a disadvantage in terms of competitiveness in the North American context. This project needs to go through because, frankly, it is in the national interest. It's not just about Alberta. It is about the fact that thousands upon thousands of people, not just in the energy sector, will derive jobs, income, and benefits for a long time to come because of the build out of this project. Also, this project helps to fund social programs in every corner of our country, including in British Columbia. And this project is so important because right now, most of our existing capacity within Canada's pipelines, it's stretched to the limit. And we also sell at a loss compared to world price because most of our production goes to the United States. So we take the price that they give us rather than setting the price by having access to markets. So if we're talking about getting the most out of pulling resources out of the ground, we should be trying to close that delta. It's very clearly in the national interest for that reason. Also, I think that this is a significant signal to the international community that Canada does not have a political environment wherein large-scale investments, this is a $7.4 billion project, can actually happen in Canada. The fact that this project has gone through years and countless iterations of environmental review and received a review process and still is not being able to be built out is, can you imagine being an investor internationally and looking at Canada right now and looking at the leadership that we've got in Ottawa? Would you invest here? And that's really what the board of directors at Kinder Morgan said today. That's what they meant by the current environment. And it's something that Justin Trudeau is beating around the bush on, but it's broader. This is a broader problem than just this pipeline. And of course, this pipeline is a problem, but I now worry about Canada's competitiveness and ability to attract investment into any major project. So some considerations for our Prime Minister. Especially given that he was just in Western Canada and failed to basically talk about anything. There is a declaratory power under our Constitution. It's it's a constitutional power. It's section 9210C. And what this does is it allows the federal government to declare certain things in the national interest. Now, some academics in Alberta who have argued for carbon taxes have said, well, this doesn't work. It's already in the federal jurisdiction. Why should the Prime Minister look at this? The reality is that if the Prime Minister invoked this or looked into invoking this section, any remaining provincial authority that might be used to block this project, which again has gone through rigorous multi-phase environmental assessment, could be superseded. And that includes things like, I think about just even issuing permits for roads necessary to build out that particular project. So the fact that the Prime Minister has not commented on that is of concern. I want to use this opportunity to remind you that my colleague from the Alberta Legislature and myself, Prasad Panda, have sponsored a petition to asking on the Prime Minister to do this. You can sign that at www.use92.ca, and over 6,500 people have already signed this, yet it is not in the national discourse. I think that many Canadians right now are asking if Premier Horgan is going to denigrate a project that has received approval, again, under one of the world's most vociferous regulatory process, environmental review processes. There are benefits that British Columbians get from the federal government, like things like infrastructure funding that come from the revenues associated with the energy sector. I'm hearing people talk about this at this point in time. I believe in confederation. I believe that Canada is greater than the sum of its parts. However, there comes a point when if that point is not being strongly made by the leadership of our country, perhaps he should be at least pointing that out. The other thing is that the Prime Minister needs to uphold the rule of law when it comes to protests. The fact that I have colleagues in the House of Commons who have been, I think, arrested for protesting, it not only sets a bad example, but the Prime Minister's failure to insist that he will be upholding the rule of law. We have laws around these types of activities, I think, is deeply disappointing and sends the wrong message. The other thing is the Premier of Alberta has been in league with our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. The deal that they made a handshake on was the fact that a carbon tax and a 100 megaton emission cap being put in place by the Alberta government was going to create, quote unquote, social license to build out this pipeline. Clearly, that's not the case. Why is this still happening? This carbon tax does not reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Canada. The fact that the Environment Minister has had disastrous interview after disastrous interview after disastrous committee appearance and can't answer those basic questions, clearly we've got a problem here. Social license does not build pipelines. Smart environmental regulatory processes, smart environmental monitoring systems, which we have both, that this project has gone through, is what it takes to get a license to build a pipeline, which this company has. So the argument around social license today with this decision was proved 100% futile. The other thing is that at this point in time, the Prime Minister needs to be asking or talking about the fact that British Columbia has brought a question to the BC court that the Premier framed out the question around about, I believe it's a ban on increased amount of dilbit coming through the province. And of course, this is what precipitated this trade war. I'm just wondering why the Prime Minister isn't looking, and I mean, this is one of the uncertainty factors that I'm sure Kinder Morgan's Board of Directors looked at today. I'm just wondering why the Prime Minister isn't talking about the fact that perhaps this should be accelerated to the Supreme Court so that there is less, so it's not taking years to wind its way through the courts and years of uncertainty. I would think that if the Prime Minister signaled something to that effect, that perhaps there would be less uncertainty for Kinder Morgan in making their decision. The other things that I think we frankly need to talk about in this context is that the Pipeline Industry Association completely eviscerated the Prime Minister's ridiculous legislation. It's called Bill C-69, I believe, around revamping the environmental review process. I don't think you'll find anybody who says that this bill provides value add in terms of more environmental rigor. What it is designed to do is to ensure that pipelines do not get built in this country. And the industry association, which has typically utilized appeasement process or appeasement tactics with the Liberal government in the past, called it for what it was prior to the House rising for April recess, and essentially said that if this bill passes, no company in their right mind would look at Canada as a place to invest in pipelines because it adds so much uncertainty. It is a way for the Prime Minister to add more uncertainty into the review process. And I think that they need to come clean on that and certainly pause that legislation. I've just given you a lot of technical things, but this boils down to two things. There is a human cost. There are faces to this lack of leadership. There is a great cost to this country because of the lack of the leadership that the Prime Minister is showing on this particular project. And those are the tens of thousands of people, including those who are in my riding, but also in Ontario and steel manufacturing industries, who are losing economic opportunity because of his lack of leadership, because of this decision today. $7.4 billion investment, a project that would create jobs and prosperity for years to come. There is a human cost to this. There is a cost to the fact that this project builds out and sees the funding for our social programs that we're so proud of in this country, that we open up to that we've opened up to people from around the world. There's a huge cost to this. And everything that I talked about today, the signal that this sends to the world in terms of being open for business, the impact that it has on the question of Canada's, in terms of the sustainability of how we relate to each other province to province. That is what the leadership of a Prime Minister is supposed to do. If you are the Prime Minister of Canada, be the Prime Minister of Canada and talk about how now and what you are going to do that's not necessarily popular, but that's right to ensure that this country has something that it's in its best interest. Stop this, complete nonsense talking about, oh, well, we need to transition to a sustainable economy and then trying to kill an industry. There's a key word in there. It's called transition. And Canada has been doing that for years by having some of the most rigorous environmental standards in the world. If not Canada, then who produces energy better? It's something we should be proud of. I cannot express my frustration deeply enough to you because I know I've watched this impact my riding for the last 2.5 years. I have watched my constituency go from essentially the natural rate of unemployment to a very high unemployment rate in a very short period of time. I have watched families lose their jobs and their houses and go through marital strife. I have read the stories in the Calgary Herald about women having to go into sex work because they haven't been able to provide for their families. Yeah, Catherine, look at that gender evaluation of your decisions. I am so frustrated the fact that the Prime Minister has not come out and even talked about any of these options. And when he was in Fort McMurray yesterday, you know what his response to this was? Oh, it was Harper's fault. Okay, that's why we built out 4 pipelines. That's why we had in place an environmental standard regulatory process that gave certainty to industry, but also ensured that we were reviewing things in a rigorous way. It's 2.5 years in, Justin, and this one is on you. So giddy up. It's gloves off. This is a big decision. This decision today has national consequences. And you know what? If you wanted to ruin the energy industry, at least summon the courage that your father had to call it for what it is. National Energy Program the second. Just come out and say that you don't want to see these things built and put us all out of the misery and take ownership for the consequences of doing that. My colleagues and I will be continuing to hold the government to account on this. I know some of you say things like petitions don't matter. They do, because they unify us in purpose on something that matters. Sign that petition, www.use92.ca, and you can be assured that I will be doing everything in my power to do what's right. Working hard for you. Have a great evening.